What it takes to disprove the existence of God. It is commonly supposed that one cannot disprove a negative. What is less admitted to is that in the conventional understanding of reality, one cannot prove a positive either. In classical science, there are no proofs. Nothing is proven or provable in empirical science. Therefore, to demand a positive proof of God is as absurd and fraught with difficulty as a negative proof is. Indeed, the question could be asked, what is there that has been proven true beyond the ability to doubt? Because we are not talking about scientific proof or even a courtroom proof, we are talking about a proof so overwhelmingly strong that it is impossible to fault it. Is there anything that everyone considers true without reservation? Whatever is positive has also been given a negative version. No matter how many times the sun rises, we cannot guarantee it will always rise. Theoretically, all of the molecules in the air could all wind up in one corner of a room. When there are no absolutes, all we have are probabilities. Regardless of how improbable something might be, it still remains a possibility. This inability to prove anything conclusively might seem nothing more than an interesting problem or a minor nuisance. I mean, we know the sun will rise tomorrow, even if we cannot prove that it must rise tomorrow. We live our entire day, fully expecting that tomorrow, the sun will rise. But we also know God exists, but atheists want Christians to provide conclusive and irrefutable proof he exists, while blithely claiming no one can prove a negative. But if the problem was so simple, why does no one prove physical reality exists? It seems that ought to be much easier than proving God exists. Proving physical reality exists is a positive proof. One can give a preliminary proof by hitting a table. That is a good indication that something is there. But the more we try to find what reality is, the more it disappears until nothing is left but the force that impacts other forces. When we talk about reality, all we find we are discussing is the word. We discuss what the concept means, and by that we mean, we discuss how the term reality relates to other terms. Matter, energy, space and time are the concepts that compose reality. When we talk about reality, we must compose it. And if we wish to talk about matter or any of the other elements of reality, we have to talk about the elements that compose them. In the end, all we can do is talk about the words that make up our language, so we understand how all of these concepts fit together to give us a picture of reality. God, as a word, needs to be defined. But we cannot truly define God because there are no higher order categories to put him into. So, we say that God is the highest and most perfect of concepts. God is not composed of anything but himself. If we could prove that God was made of gold or God was a being who lived on a mountain, his existence would be dependent on the existence and nature of gold and mountains. He could not be considered the highest and most perfect of all concepts. This might not seem an important consideration for most people, but if God is not perfect, there is no perfection. If there is no perfection, there is no imperfection. Imperfection can only be judged by comparing it to perfection. If imperfection is compared to imperfection, the two are just different. One cannot be better, nor can the other be worse, because there is no perfect representation for them to be compared to. Which means there cannot be imperfection if there is no perfection. All we have, if there is nothing perfect to serve as a standard, is various actual types. In other words, in a relativist reality, or one composed of matter, energy, space and time, not only is there no God, but there is also no truth, no good or evil and no moral standard. There is no means to judge anyone other than our own flawed self. And we are not God. Consequently, once we have determined reality as physical, we have logically excluded the possibility of an ultimate good or an ultimate God. But before we dismiss God, ought we not first prove that physical reality exists? However, atheists already know there are no provable propositions in or about physical reality. All propositions are conditional. However, they still adhere to the claim that a negative cannot be proven. But once again, that is only true in a reality that is no truth. 2 + 2 = 5 can be disproven. But we can also disprove the proposition that only physical reality exists. This is important because if more than one reality exists, then the fact that God's existence is incompatible with a physical reality is not the same thing as proving God does not exist. If there is only one reality, it could not be physical, because if there is a physical reality, there must be an analytical reality, to compensate for the failures and limitations of the synthetic material reality. If there is a perfect system, it is one reality. there cannot be more than one perfect system. But if there is imperfection, the number of imperfect systems is potentially infinite. There is no limit to the number of imperfect systems. Regardless of the number of imperfect systems, they are all contained in the class of things that are imperfect. But this poses a problem, because how can you have a class of imperfect things, if there is no perfect thing? If conventional reality is composed of imperfect things, how could we know? How could we strive to make this world better, if there was no perfect reality to aspire to? More importantly, if there is a perfect reality, it could not be part of the reality of imperfections. Thus, it is logically necessary there be a perfect reality, if there is imperfection, and if there is imperfection, it is also logically necessary for a perfect God to be part of the perfect reality, and not the imperfect one. Proving God does not exist in the imperfect reality inhabited by atheists is not difficult. In fact, it is patently absurd to suppose God could exist in an imperfect reality. Of course, some atheists might wish to argue that a perfect reality does not exist, that the only reality is the reality of imperfection, though this is logically incoherent. How can an imperfect reality exist that encompasses all possible realities when it cannot, by definition, include perfection or absolutes? If the imperfect reality could and did include perfection, it would invalidate all of the imperfections and leave the door open for the existence of God. One cannot have it both ways. Logic precludes that. It is possible to prove God cannot exist in an imperfect system and that imperfection cannot be part of the class of perfect things. So, physical reality occupy different zones. These realities cannot overlap. We can derive another conclusion from this premise or proposition. If God is in a perfect reality and atheists in an imperfect reality, atheists cannot perceive God. They are to all intents and purposes, blind and deaf to the existence of God. They are also blind and deaf to perfection itself. This is why they are blind and deaf to the truth, because they do not have perfection to guide them. It is possible to prove a negative when the negative disproves itself. The reality of imperfection cannot exist because it is logically incoherent. If existence requires the existence not to contradict itself, then the reality of the atheist cannot exist. The atheist cannot claim God does not exist because physical reality is the only possible existence, when such a claim requires a perfect truth be possible. But this is the only thing those who adhere to a physical reality deny. Atheists and secularists adhere to a contrary position. They claim that perfection does not exist, but it does exist with physical reality. But as said, the one thing physical reality is not consistent with, is the idea of perfection. It precludes it. When a Christian foolishly attempts to prove God exists in a physical universe, the atheist claims it did not fulfill the burden of proof. According to what standard? Is the atheist capacity to doubt truly the standard that any claim must seek to satisfy? How can atheists claim there is but one reality, when such a statement requires a standard of comparison, and you cannot have a standard of comparison for a singular case? If there is none other like it, then there must be others that are in a different class. The singular case is an absolute and an absolute precludes the relative. It is the same thing when atheists claim a relativistic universe eliminates metaphysics, which is a metaphysical claim. The conclusion is, all that it takes to disprove the existence of God is a conception of reality that precludes the possibility of God. Postulate such a reality and one has proved the negative case regarding the existence of God. However, there are repercussions. If you cannot prove the existence of God, you cannot prove anything else. To disprove the existence of God requires you lose the ability to prove anything in the positive case. To prove the positive case you must first postulate the existence takes you into an entirely different realm, the positive realm of an analytical universe.